Hi, my name's Deleith. My sister didn't just mock me at a job interview, she made sure I never got the job. Then laughed as they tore my test in half right in front of a room full of strangers. But what she didn't know? The man she couldn't control, the one who walked in next, was my fiancé. She thought I was beneath her. Until the silence turned, and I didn't need her approval to rise. Ever been erased by your own family, only to come back stronger than they could have imagined? Because this is the day I stopped asking for a seat and built the table myself. Before we begin, what time are you listening and where from? Drop a comment. Let's talk family drama. The walls were all glass, sleek, cold, corporate. I could see my own reflection as I walked in, my posture straight, my shoes scuffed. My name badge felt heavier than it should have. I held my resume folder close, the corners soft from being packed and repacked over the past few weeks. The Storm CP logo glared from every screen in the room, like it was watching me. A few other candidates were already seated, polished, confident, designer suits, perfect hair, the kind of people who always know someone on the inside. I forced a smile when one of them glanced at me, but it wasn't returned. I took the only available chair, slightly off-center, not quite in the circle, like it had been left for someone who didn't quite belong. I reminded myself, I didn't need to belong. I just needed to be seen. Then the door clicked, and Seraphine walked in. She was in a navy silk blouse, heels that echoed on the tile, and a mug in her hand that screamed money. Her makeup was subtle but flawless, and her hair was swept into the kind of bun that says, "I don't have time for you." My breath caught. She didn't flinch when our eyes met, didn't acknowledge me. Not a nod, not a blink. She walked to the table like I wasn't her younger sister, like I hadn't once shared a room with her, like she hadn't ruined my first job interview 7 years ago. Seraphine took her seat among the panelists, yes, panelists, and sipped from her mug while another interviewer introduced the session. The room buzzed with HR buzzwords, leadership potential, team synergy, scalable strategy. I felt like I was hearing a foreign language. "Would anyone like coffee?" one of the assistants asked, carrying a tray. The tray made its rounds. Every single person got a cup. Except me. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Seraphine was already smirking over her mug, and I caught the moment she leaned toward the woman next to her and whispered, "She's still dressing like she shops in college clearance bins." The woman chuckled, just enough to sting. I kept my gaze steady. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. But inside, my stomach curled. I stared at the tabletop and the grain of the fake wood. I focused on my breathing. I remembered nights sitting at my cramped desk, piecing together freelance contracts, learning system design from scratch while my ex said it was a cute little phase. I remembered the day Seraphine forwarded my portfolio to the wrong client, intentionally. The company pulled out. It was my birthday. I told myself I wouldn't run this time. Not from her, not from this. They started calling names. One by one, the candidates went up for introductions. As they spoke, Seraphine nodded, smiled, took notes. When my name was called, she didn't even glance up. I stood, walked to the center, and placed my resume down in front of her. She picked it up, stared at it for all of 2 seconds. Then, without a word, she slid it to the man sitting beside her like it was some misplaced brochure from the lobby. He barely glanced at it before setting it aside. And that was it. That was my moment. No questions, no eye contact, just dismissal. I sat back down. Someone behind me coughed. The clock on the wall ticked louder than it should have. I tried to straighten my shoulders, to ignore the heat creeping up my neck. "She's here?" I heard a voice whisper behind me. "Didn't think she was even in tech." And then, Seraphine laughed. Not loudly, but enough. I didn't turn around. I didn't blink. But I made a note. Some people look right through you when you're not dressed to their expectations. Others laugh when they think you're beneath them. The question wasn't whether they saw me. It was whether I'd let them define me. I reached down, adjusted the resume folder on my lap, and reminded myself of something my mother once said, years before Seraphine started using words like legacy and executive brand. "Don't ever beg to be invited somewhere you built." The paper made a faint sound as it slid away, familiar, like rejection always had its own soft signature. Before I could steady my breath, the next name was called. Another polished candidate, gold watch, thick accent, Yale ring, stood and spoke about leadership and transformation. The panel chuckled at his jokes. Someone even clapped. The energy in the room shifted, like I had never been there. I waited. Maybe they'd circle back to me. Maybe there'd be a pause, an opening, anything. There wasn't. 3 more questions flew by. I was passed over again and again like I was part of the decor. When the assistant finally looked my way, it wasn't with apology. It was more like, "Oh, you're still here." A tall man near the head of the table, Greg, I remembered from the intro email, leaned back in his chair and smirked. "So," he said, twirling a pen, "what makes you think you're ready for the big leagues?" His tone dripped with amusement, like he was asking a child if she thought she could run NASA. I opened my mouth, but before I could speak, Seraphine reached across the table. Her hand snatched the top sheet of my resume again like it offended her. She clicked her pen open, bright red ink, and scrawled something across the page. I could see it from where I sat. Wrong major, wrong look, wrong fit. Then, in bold block letters across the bottom, unqualified. The red bled through, staining the paper like a wound. I didn't blink. I didn't reach for it. I let her set it down with a self-satisfied smile, her hand sliding it across the polished surface like she was offering evidence in court. I cleared my throat. "I led an AI ethics redesign for 3 mid-tier platforms," I said. "Last year, I helped scale a predictive data system that cut processing time by 34%. That framework is now—" "You still chasing those little dream projects?" Seraphine interrupted, her tone airy, her smile syrupy. She turned to the panel. While I was presenting at a London summit, she was still uploading resumes to Indeed. There were chuckles, a few suppressed coughs. Greg smirked. Even the assistant tried to hide a grin. It was happening again, but I didn't flinch. Not this time. I looked at Seraphine, not the panelist, not the corporate goddess in heels, but the sister who used to read my journals out loud at school when she was bored, the one who told me I'd never have the teeth for this world. And still, a part of me had hoped that just once she might look at me across the table and see more than a punchline. She knew my whole story. She knew how hard I'd worked, what I'd been through. But that knowledge wasn't a bridge. It was a weapon. I breathed in through my nose and out slowly. My hands stayed still. My voice, when I spoke, was calm. "I may not look like what you're used to, but the results are there. You just chose not to read them." Greg leaned back. "Well, we've seen enough. Appreciate the optimism." Seraphine's fingers drummed on the table. She didn't look at me now. She didn't need to. The damage had been done, and enjoyed. A moment later, one of the panelists slid my resume back across the table, now folded sharply in half. "Good luck finding something at your level," he said, almost kindly. "Maybe retail?" I reached for it with steady fingers, nodded once, and stood. "I'll let you know," I said quietly, and I walked toward the door. But I wasn't going home. I didn't stop walking until the sliding glass doors of the building had closed behind me. Midtown traffic buzzed around me, sirens in the distance, horns like background noise in a city that didn't pause for bruised egos. My heels clicked on the sidewalk, purposeful but not rushed. I wasn't running from anything, just trying to find air that didn't smell like polished wood and fake smiles. 2 blocks away, I ducked into a narrow cafe that always smelled like burnt espresso and guilt. The barista barely glanced up. I ordered a drip coffee I wouldn't drink, just to justify taking up the corner table by the window. The folder was still in my hand. I sat down slowly. My fingers traced the edge of the top page, red ink staining the corner like blood that hadn't been washed out completely. Unqualified, in all caps, all confidence. I don't know why I was surprised, because this wasn't new. This wasn't even the worst of it. I stared out at the taxi zipping past, but my mind pulled me backward. Years, age 24, my first full-time job offer, nearly in hand. I'd been freelancing for months, pulled all-nighters polishing a pitch deck for a data integration platform tailored for nonprofits. I was proud of it. I had shared it with Seraphine one night, in what I thought was a moment of sisterly bonding. She'd been consulting at a boutique firm then. A week later, that same firm released a near-identical proposal, presented by Seraphine. She didn't lie. That was the cruel brilliance of it. She just didn't correct them when they assumed it was hers. I mean, I didn't say it was mine, she'd told me later over wine at a family dinner. But if people connect dots, that's not my fault. The job had gone to a guy she referred, someone who had the right look. And I was left explaining why my concept had already been launched, without me. I remember my father laughing at dinner that night. He raised his glass and toasted, "To my daughters, Seraphine, the visionary, Delith. She's always been the kind one." Kind. The word had stuck to my ribs for a decade. I stared down at the red ink now and realized, this wasn't sabotage, it was a cycle. Every time I shared something, she'd bend it, reframe it, wear it, and then convince the room I was just a side note, quiet, nice, but never sharp enough to cut through the noise. I pulled out my phone. My inbox was still open to a message from one of the small startups I did part-time code audits for. I had typed up a resignation last week, unsure if I was wasting time holding on to side gigs when I was trying to land something big. My finger hovered over the draft. Maybe I wasn't meant for any of it. Maybe all the late nights and self-doubt were trying to tell me something. Then I deleted the draft. No, not this time. She didn't get to shrink me again. Not today. The cafe was too quiet now. My coffee had gone cold. I pulled my phone out again when it buzzed. A text from Elias. "How did the interview go?" I stared at it. My thumb started typing. It went exactly the way she wanted it to. But I paused, read it again, then erased it. That would have been her narrative, not mine. I took a deep breath, stared at the blinking cursor, and typed just one word, "Fine." Then I stood, slipped on my coat, and pushed my chair back from the table. I wasn't done. The elevator dinged too loudly, like it was warning the building I was back. The security guard at the front desk blinked at me when I returned. "Didn't they?" "I'm here for the open assessment round," I said simply. He hesitated, then picked up the phone. "One moment." He didn't ask questions. Maybe he saw something in my face, something sharp enough to slice through the doubt. 2 minutes later, I was heading back up. When the doors opened on the 40th floor, the energy shifted. The panel hadn't expected to see me again. I could see it in their faces, thin smiles, twitching brows. Seraphine didn't even hide her smirk. "Changed your mind? You never were good at letting go." I said nothing, just walked toward the empty chair, the one they hadn't offered earlier. I pulled it out myself, sat down, and waited. Greg, the senior exec with the too perfect tan and an ego that filled the room, leaned back with theatrical delight. "Well then," he said, "since you're so eager to be here, how about we put that brain to use? Let's see if you're actually worth this room." He signaled to the assistant. A thick packet landed in front of me. Paper, not digital. No calculator, no laptop, just a pen, a test. Logic, systems, algorithms, twisted enough to feel like a punishment. 10 pages, 15 minutes, Greg said. "You're not allowed to ask questions. And yes, we're timing you." I heard someone chuckle. It wasn't subtle. I nodded once, picked up the pen, and started. Every second thudded in my ears like a drumbeat. I ignored the weight of their stares, the sound of someone slurping coffee, Seraphine's chair creaking as she leaned toward another panelist to whisper something. The whisper was sharp enough to carry. Let's see if her little sociology-adjacent AI hobby gets her anywhere now. I didn't look up, not once. When I hit the last question, my wrist ached and my breath had shortened. But I finished. Clean. No crossings out. No second guesses. I pushed the packet across the table. Greg didn't smile. He flipped through the pages like he was flipping through a tabloid he already hated. Then, he tore it in half, deliberate, slow. The room went dead quiet. The sound of paper ripping, page by page, was louder than any shout. He let the pieces fall into the trash can beside him and muttered, "Impressive penmanship, but we don't hire fiction writers." Laughter. From someone. I couldn't tell who. It came from my left, faded into a cough. I stayed seated, my hands in my lap. Seraphine tilted her head like she was watching a dog do a trick it didn't quite finish. Her voice was almost tender. You always were stubborn. Never learned when to quit. I rose slowly, walked to the trash can, and knelt. Piece by piece, I picked up the paper he'd destroyed. Not to save it, not to prove anything, but because I wanted to remember this moment exactly as it was. The feel of paper with answers they didn't bother to read. The weight of silence. The sharp edges of their cowardice. Someone behind me cleared their throat, uncomfortable, but no one stopped me. And then, just as I reached for the last page, someone kicked it away. A sharp-pointed heel pinned it near the chair leg. Seraphine? She leaned down slightly, her voice a whisper that still cut through the air. Still crawling for approval? I looked up at her. She expected tears. Maybe shame. Instead, I stood, and for the first time in years, I smiled. By the time I made it out of that building again, the sky had dimmed to that blue-gray tone New Jersey knows too well in early spring. Moody, restless, and ready to rain. The cold bit through my blazer, but I didn't feel it. I just kept walking until I passed the bakery on Ridgewood Avenue that always left its lights on late. The glow reminded me of that dinner, 2 nights earlier. The night that should have told me everything I needed to know. It was supposed to be a family gathering, a casual meal. Just catching up, Dad had said in the group text. But when I arrived, I knew the script had already been written. We were at Belmont House. White linen tablecloths, candles, a private room near the back. Mom waved when she saw me, but didn't get up. The host handed me a menu after everyone else had already ordered. I sat down beside a decorative fern. Then the applause started. Seraphine had walked in, 20 minutes late, and everyone stood to greet her like she'd returned from war. I was on a call with Soul, she said, not even apologizing. Time zones are a nightmare. Dad beamed. That's our girl. Still closing global deals while we eat. I sipped my water, said nothing. We toasted champagne. Mom leaned in, nudging her glass toward mine, and said, freelancing must build resilience. It's like a side quest in your 20s. I was 32, but the moment that burned itself into me came during dessert. Seraphine had been talking to Dad about a Storm CP partnership, something about integrating AI ethics modules into corporate risk assessment. Words I knew intimately, because I'd written the framework for a startup 3 years ago. I'd shared it with Seraphine once, over wine and naive sisterly pride. Now it was her talking points. Dad raised his glass. To Seraphine's newest promotion, our fearless innovator. My fork hovered over the tiramisu. I looked at Mom. She smiled gently and said, Don't look so serious, Del. It's not a competition. I forced a smile. Of course not. Then Seraphine leaned in close, her voice so soft it slid like a blade. She poured me another glass of wine and whispered, You'll always be beneath me, darling. You know that, right? A camera flash went off right then, Mom capturing a sweet sister's moment, and in the photo, I'm smiling, chin tilted, lips curled, glass raised, a lie captured in perfect lighting. Back in the present, I found myself in the women's restroom at Storm CP, gripping the marble sink. The face in the mirror wasn't crying, but the mascara was crooked. My lips had gone pale. I splashed water on my cheeks and watched the smudges melt into my skin. One of the stalls opened. 2 interns came out, laughing. She really bombed. Greg actually tore it up. Like, in front of everyone. The second one giggled. She just picked up the pieces. Like a kicked puppy. Wasn't that the one Seraphine said was her cousin, or, like, distant relative or something? They left without noticing me. I didn't move, just stared at the reflection of my reflection. Something behind my eyes shifted. The softness cracked. There was steel now, quiet, but certain. When I walked back into the hallway, I paused at the glass wall overlooking the reception floor. That's when I saw her. She couldn't have been older than 25. Hair pinned back too tight, resume clutched to her chest like a shield. A manager brushed past her without a glance. Her eyes tracked him, then fell. And then they found mine. She didn't smile, but her grip loosened just slightly. That's when I understood. I was never meant to shrink in their presence. I wasn't the one who needed approval anymore. I didn't rush. My steps were measured, calm, too calm, maybe. But after years of folding myself to fit into rooms that never had space for me, I was done contorting. The receptionist blinked when I walked back in. "Miss Marin? I need to speak to the panel again," I said, buttoning my coat like armor. She hesitated. "They're in the middle of reviewing—" I met her eyes. "I know. That's why I'm here." After a few seconds, she nodded and picked up the phone. They didn't make me wait long. I was escorted to the same conference room I'd left not an hour ago, and just like before, no one stood. Greg looked up, pen in hand. "Forget your pride on the way out." Seraphine chuckled under her breath. "You really don't know when to quit, do you?" "I'm not here to beg," I said, stepping forward. "I came because you left something out." Laura looked confused. "What exactly?" "My record, my work, the things that actually matter." I placed a small folder on the table. "You're interrupting a closed session," Greg began, but the door behind me opened, this time not by me. The air changed before I even turned around. A shift, stiffened backs, cut off words. Coulter Brannick stepped into the room like a shadow carried by certainty. Tailored black, no tie, calm as a cliff edge. Everyone stood. Seraphine's hand went to her mouth. "Wait, Coulter? I mean, Mr. Brannick?" He didn't look at her. He walked straight to me, touched my back, just gently enough that the room might have missed it if they weren't already holding their breath. "Are you okay?" he asked me. "Only me." I nodded once. They didn't know who I was. He turned to them now, face unreadable. "Interesting, because some of you apparently know me very well." Greg cleared his throat. "Sir, if we'd known she was qualified," Coulter cut in, "experienced, or just human?" He walked to the head of the table, opened the folder I'd left, and spread the pages across the glass. "Delith Marin, freelance architect on 3 of our internal systems, co-authored our ethics framework for the AI compliance model in 2021, the white-labeled one, which half this panel still doesn't understand." A flush crawled up Greg's neck. Laura was staring at the documents like they'd started glowing. Coulter slid a photo across the table. "This is the metrics report you all used last quarter. Her work. Not signed, but hers." Then he turned to me. "Anything else you'd like to add?" I looked at the panel. Looked at Seraphine. Her mouth was slightly open, like a joke had gone too far and no one was laughing anymore. "I was never here to ask for a favor," I said. "I showed up because I believed I had value. Turns out I had more than that. I had proof. You just didn't bother to see it." Seraphine opened her mouth, but for once, nothing came out. Coulter's voice dropped into ice. "I believe this requires a review of yesterday's interview practices. Fairness, compliance, conduct." Greg shuffled the papers in front of him, stammering. "It was informal, exploratory, not binding." "Oh," Coulter said mildly, "then you won't mind us playing back the footage." He gestured to the mounted screen in the corner. A remote sat waiting. "Let's see how you all conducted yourselves under informal conditions." I stood beside him as he picked up the remote, and for the first time, none of them could look away from me. This wasn't a favor. It wasn't a rescue. It was recognition. Long overdue and earned. The moment the video began, the oxygen left the room. No one moved. No one even pretended to multitask. Just the sound of my voice explaining my work, followed by Greg's smug chuckle, Laura's backhanded comments, and Seraphine's slow, deliberate takedown. There it was, her smirk when she dismissed my resume, the way she said side quest, like my life had been a detour from something real. Every eye in the room flicked between the screen and Seraphine, whose lips were drawn tight now, her perfectly glossed facade cracking with each second. When the footage caught her pouring wine and whispering, "You'll always be beneath me," I didn't look away. I didn't flinch, but I could feel everyone else shifting in their seats like the floor had just dropped out from under them. Coulter remained perfectly still, arms crossed. He didn't even glance her way. When the screen finally went dark, no one spoke at first. Even the board members on the video call were frozen. Then the legal advisor cleared his throat. "This isn't just bad judgment," he said flatly. "This is a potential liability. HR and legal will be looped in before close of business today. Greg opened his mouth, probably to pivot or pretend this was all somehow a misunderstanding, but Seraphine cut in with something no one expected. She planned this, she barked. She wanted all of this on record. This was manipulation. Her voice cracked near the end, louder than she probably intended. I raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. That silence must have rattled her more than any defense I could have thrown. And then, she snapped, I introduced you to him, she shouted, pointing at me like I'd stolen something sacred. For the first time in the room, I let my voice match the weight of truth. Yes, I said calmly. And when he chose me, you made sure no one else did. A pin could have dropped. Coulter turned toward her slowly, like he was giving her one last out. So you admit, he said coolly, you interfered with her employment referrals? You compromised our own hiring protocols? Seraphine scoffed. I was protecting the company from nepotism. The only nepotism here, I said softly, was protecting yourself from being compared to someone you never thought would rise. Laura suddenly slid her notepad away from her. Greg looked at his shoes. No one was rushing to defend her now. I wasn't trying to destroy you, Seraphine muttered, more to herself than to anyone else. No, I replied. You were trying to erase me, to rewrite my name out of the picture so you could frame yourself alone in every story. My voice didn't shake, even though my hands were curled tight at my sides. Coulter stepped forward and placed his hand flat on a new folder. There's one more piece of evidence Seraphine didn't know we had, he said evenly. Seraphine blinked, caught between panic and confusion. What now? She whispered. And in that moment, I saw it. The exact second her power began to collapse in on itself. Not because of what I did, but because everything she buried had just started to claw its way to the surface. As Coulter opened the folder, the room tensed. The soft whisper of the paper sliding out was louder than anyone dared to breathe. He laid down a printed page, an internal audit trail from the company's HR system. The header read, Applicant History, Marin, Delith. The legal advisor leaned forward. These notes were appended during your 2019 application cycle, he said. We've verified the metadata. The source login was Seraphine's. The notes were short, but they stung. Displays resistance to feedback. Would not be a cultural fit. History of unpredictable collaboration. They weren't just petty. Those phrases were career killers. Coulter didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. You altered internal files to block your sister's candidacy? He asked. I was trying to protect the company, Seraphine said tightly. You don't understand what it's like to have someone cling to you just to get ahead. You're done here, Coulter said, his tone final. Effective immediately. A wave of air seemed to shift through the room. No anger, just cold clarity. Security was called. Seraphine stood, jaw clenched, eyes darting. But before she was out the door, she whipped around, a final lunge for control. She's not innocent, she snapped. Look at this! Look at what she sent a client. She slammed her phone screen on the table, a screenshot of an email, allegedly from me, calling a potential partner a walking disaster in heels. It had my name on it, my email footer, even the company tag, except I already knew it existed. I reached calmly into my bag and pulled out a small black binder. This, I said, sliding it across to legal, is the server log from 2 nights ago. That email? It originated from Seraphine's IP address, logged in under her temporary admin pass. A silence followed. Not shock this time, just confirmation. Greg shifted back in his seat. Laura looked down at her notes. The assistant in the corner who'd once giggled behind my back suddenly found her shoes interesting. Coulter nodded once. Forging internal credentials to defame a team member is more than unethical, he said. You'll be hearing from legal, Seraphine snapped. You think you're better than me now, just because he picked you? I didn't need to raise my voice. No, I said, looking straight into her unraveling eyes. Just done being beneath you. Security let her out. Not with force, with finality. And that silence again, the kind that tastes like justice. I stood there as the board began to murmur among themselves. Coulter didn't ask. He turned and simply said, I move that we reinstate Delith Marin to her original consulting role, this time full-time with project lead authority. All in favor? He asked. Every hand went up. The HR rep stood. You're being offered lead strategy consultant. Seraphine's former office is yours. I looked toward the glass-encased corner suite with the skyline view. It had always been her throne, but I shook my head. No, I said. I'd like a desk near the development floor, closer to the team. They paused, then nodded. As I signed the contract, someone, Laura, I think, slid a small folded note across the table. I opened it. We're glad you're finally where you've always belonged. I didn't respond. I just smiled and walked out without looking back. The paper made a soft sound as it slid into the box, so quiet, but to me it was thunder. A clean fold, red ink still faintly bleeding along the edge, and a note in my handwriting clipped to the top. Let this help someone who's still learning not to listen to the voices trying to shrink them. That resume wasn't shame anymore. It was a receipt for every lesson I paid for in silence. I stepped outside into the early evening light. New York had the kind of golden haze that made even the sharpest corners look forgiving. The sidewalk buzzed, but for once, it didn't swallow me. I let myself walk slowly, feeling the rhythm of my own steps again. When I got back upstairs to collect my things, I passed Seraphine's old office. The door stood wide open. Inside, a cleaning crew was wiping down the shelves, removing a framed quote she used to brag about. Winners write the rules. I paused briefly. There was nothing to say, nothing to reclaim. The space didn't belong to me, not because I couldn't have it, but because I didn't need it. I turned the corner and nearly bumped into someone, her, not Seraphine, the young woman from the hallway, the one who clutched her resume like it was a lifeline weeks ago. They called me back, she said breathlessly, for the role you told me to apply for. Good, I said, holding her eyes. You deserve it. She smiled in that way only people on the edge of belief do, hopeful, nervous, but finally standing still enough to listen to themselves. Later, in my new office, smaller, sunlit, and surrounded by the people who actually built things, I sat alone for a moment. The room smelled like lemon cleaner and fresh beginnings. My bag hit the floor with a soft thud. I opened one drawer, taped the torn resume back together, and pinned it above my desk. It looked like a scar. And that felt right. I didn't tape it to remind myself of Seraphine, or even the pain. I taped it because it was the moment I started choosing dignity over desperation. My phone buzzed, a message from my father. I didn't see everything before, I'm sorry. I stared at it for a full minute, then set the phone down without replying, not out of anger, just clarity. He didn't owe me closure, and I didn't owe him an explanation. Some bridges weren't meant to burn, but they sure as hell weren't meant to be rebuilt either. I leaned back in my chair. Sunlight stretched across the corkboard, catching the resume's frayed edges like gold threads in a tapestry. She said I'd always be beneath her. Turns out I just needed to stop standing in her shadow. And maybe that's all it ever was. Me trying to hold a place in a family that only reserved seats for applause. Somewhere outside my window, someone laughed. Someone crossed the street without looking. Life moved on, and finally, so did I. If you've ever stayed silent because you thought they were right about you, maybe it's time to speak. Or maybe, just maybe it's time to stop explaining at all. I exhaled, pinned one last thing beside the resume, a quote scribbled on the back of an old napkin from my first failed client pitch. No one sees the quiet builder until the building outlasts the storm. Sometimes the ones who silence us wear our last name, but strength isn't always loud. It's in the quiet choice to stop chasing approval and start building your own path. Have you ever had to walk away from family to find yourself? If this story hit home, share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for more true stories like this one. Because the truth behind family drama? It's often not what it seems.